can you imagine? I want to ask again. This is the last time. Time flews like it was like yesterday we began. So since I begin to our storytelling tutorials, I want to open the beautiful quote of Neil Gaiman, and maybe one of you can share it with us. Is there anyone in this room who is volunteer to read it?
I can do if you want.
Go ahead.
Okay. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. Neil
Thank you.
Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman, yes. Thank you. This is the gift that I want to give you. Why we are telling stories? Because stories tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. And I also want to open a big question. Why stories? I want to ask you why we have stories. Why we are telling stories?
Because we have fun.
Yes, exactly. It's engagement with the joy.
Because we would like to share.
Because we want to share and connect with other people.
And actually, I want to share my experience. So I'm working as a team lead, and I see that I had a boss who had theater education background, and he was using like this storytelling to motivate people, and it's really powerful because when you put emotions and when you put like I don't know, real life cases in a story and you package it so people really get influenced. And I think stories are really powerful.
It's a tool for sense of belonging sometimes. It can be very manipulative as well, how you use, right?
Yeah.
But it creates a sense of intimacy as well between different people. Any other ideas?
Sometimes we can't tell things directly. We can't explain them, but sometimes we can, like by telling stories, by using these images in the stories, then maybe things become easier to explain or tell to people. I don't know.
Totally, Ogül, totally. It actually gives us the way how to communicate with each other in a more deep level. And sometimes we think that we are telling our stories, but maybe stories simply telling us. So in today's menu for tutorial 5, we will focus on a bit why we focus on interactive storytelling session with children. And then we will go a small time machine in Zoom meeting. We will discover our favorite children's story. And I'm really looking forward your children's story. And we will focus on why stories are important for children more technically, more pedagogically. And then we will focus on some different materials in storytelling world and what can be the right for the children groups as a categorization. And then we will talk about how the storytelling can be a path for inner development. And then we will finish it with questions and answers. So until today's session, we always focus, how can I tell my stories? How can I tell the stories focusing on rhythm and repetition? How can I tell the stories focusing on polarities? How can I tell the stories without reading but literally telling? However, the name of this workshop is actually, why should we tell stories to children interactively? What is the secret of this interaction? Well, first of all, it really develops children's ability to express themselves orally and to tell stories. Therefore, for those who has a child, hello Hannah, I guess Hannah and Fatma has their children. I really ask you to tell your stories interactively because it really strengthens listening, telling, and writing skills. improve language and presentation skills, support imagination, memory and thinking. And another important thing why we are telling those stories interactively, it's increasing the confidence actually. They also want to tell those stories. And it developed an awareness of other cultures. We will focus on the end of the slide, a danger of one single story. However, when you tell a story to your children more interactively, then it also develops a different awareness. And one of the most important thing is it encourages insights into situation with multiple perspective, and it allows the children to take a risk, like to tell or retell, to question or to be questioned. And then you can really combine it with more playfulness. In that sense, you can create a real world if you can create a real interaction with your audience, with your children. In that point, Fatma or Hannah, maybe you want to share with us your personal experiences about interacting storytelling, or should I move on?
Me not now, please. Later.
Okay. All right, then I'm continuing the next one. So in this online workshop series, we will focus on how to pick the right stories online from the library. And at the beginning of this tutorial, we focus on first about how to create a character together. Imagine 4 elements and how we actually create from zero a very interesting characters together. And then we focus on memorization techniques, how to tell a story, literally telling. And then we focus on how to use polarities in this story, like not only the good part or nice part, but also cruel and dark side as well. And the last week, we focus on a rikki-tikki-tick, a rikki-tikki-tick. Here I come to my walking stick. And in this session, we will focus on how to pick the right stories online from the library. And this tutorial will be more theoretical comparing to other sessions. But now it's a playtime. We will do a small time machine, and I want to invite you to think about what was your favorite children's story while growing up. As a focus, while you are talking with your partner, you can focus on what was the feeling about those stories at that moment and what is the feeling right now. Did your mother or father tell stories to you, like interactively? That's why maybe you are remembering it. Do you remember this cover of the book? How was the texture? What is inside? And how is it possible that you remember this book, this story? Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to online storytelling sessions again. I hope you enjoy your tandem work and you like your time machine while you discover your favorite children's story. So now became another big question. Why we think about stories and children, why it is important for children. As Ogül already mentioned, it's enjoyment. Storytelling is serious fun, I have to say. That's why we love tell stories. By saying that, it's also very functional actually in terms of listening and concentration. I mean, imagine the world that we are living right now with all this social distraction. But in the story world, the child can listen and react and can concentrate it to the different sequences. It gives an interesting focus because there are some connection, some issue, and in that sense, there is always some different focus in the story. And then they started to investigate, but afterwards, what happened? Then what happened? Why it happened? In terms of visualization and perception of the images, it creates an enormous level of creation world. It's a fictional world. And it empathizes. It gives an imagination. It gives a sense of interpretation and response. While we are growing up, we also learn to explore, describe the world of story, questioning the world of the story, analyzing, giving a reflection, making a comparison and the connection again. And another important thing is in the storytelling world, in stories, children can find an interesting tools for problem solving. In terms of construct of meaning and applying knowledge, I think stories are important for adults as well. And then accepting, understanding, and dealing with the change are extremely important for children to learn. Well, before making this research, I was not also aware how beneficial they are, you know, but they are big. Stories are really, really big. And I want to give you this beautiful quote again. Remember, a story is a way to say something that cannot be said in another way. Sometimes with our children, it's not very easy to communicate, or it's not easy to explain what we are dealing with. Or on the other hand, it's not very understand for them to express to us what they are really experiencing in their growing up tensional world. Using stories, you can understand what's going on. And by using stories, you can really say something that cannot be said in another way. So now we came the source and the core of this today's session, how to pick the right stories. The storytelling world has a 3 different dimensions. It's basic for everything. The first is the story, and then the teller and the listener. If you can create this 3 dimension, then you are a magician, yani. You don't need anything more. No technological devices, no internet connection, you know, you just need a story, a teller, and a listener. Good news is, you can know the connection between you and the story. And again, the good thing is, you can really make fun with your listener while you are telling the story. However, the real mystical part is actually arising from the connection between the story and the listener. And because of that, we really need to be aware how to pick the right story for my child. So for those who already joined to the second storytelling sessions, I hope they remember the story of the crocodile and the monkey. So for the age of 4, I am suggesting not to take a risk and pick the story of animal stories, like Aesop's, local fables, or chain stories. In that sense, it's very easy to play with the characters and evoke their imagination. There are still some interesting points to focus and investigate, and there's a link of cause and effect. And you can play about these polarities. Remember the moments of being a drama queen and the director. And when you look at those kind of books, it's Aesop's, there is always some moral lessons at the end. And to be honest, sometimes those animal stories can be too moralistic. You are the storyteller, you know the story, and you know your audience. In that sense, I highly recommend you to play with these animal stories and give the lesson what you want to give. Sometimes children actually can understand the different things more earlier. So for those who are already 3 years old can also understand some animal stories, but in principle, we focus on the standard of the age of 4. Became one of my favorites, the fairy tales. So in the fairy tales, there is a concept of transformation. And because of those concepts of transformation, we are looking for, as a criteria, an abstract and the ability of symbolic thinking, which means your children should have the ability to understand the concepts that are fictional and the factual. What is real, what is not real. Imagine the story of the brother and the sister. in the story, suddenly brother turns into the animal. So if the child is not able to understand this transformation is effectual, then it can be scary. However, after the age of 6, the taste of fairy tales is beyond imagination. The focus of the sense and the connection of the wider world is so beautiful. You can use with your repetition and rhythmical skills in the fairy tales because there are relatively longer texts. There are mostly 3 rhythms, 3 repetition in the story. There are extremely interesting polarities, and your child actually can play with the different characters interactively. There is a dynamic playfulness in that sense, and it creates a deep meaning. While saying that, there is a one motto that I want to share. We say that we tell stories to fall asleep children, and we tell stories to adults to wake them up. In that sense, fairy tales can be very interesting for you, enjoying this delightfulness in ambiguity and the paradox. The way how the chaotic world of the fairy tales come to the cosmos at the end is very interesting to focus and to respond and to play together. I'm feeling that I'm telling all those things. If you have some eagerness to tell me or to make a comment, please go ahead. It would make me happy. Go ahead.
Because you said that if your child, if the child doesn't understand when the brother turns into what was it, like an animal?
Yeah.
It could be scary, you said, but how do we know that maybe there is like a problem that he doesn't understand? What does it mean? Does it mean that my child is actually going through a problematic period, or how can I know that it's the right time for the child?
The pedagogue says that after the age of 6, the cognitive development is giving this symbolic thinking, this abstract thinking, and then the child has the ability to understand the distinction between, okay, this transformations is inside of the story. But if you tell the story less than 6 years old, I don't have the child, but I'm giving this information from the sources that I'm reading. It can be quite scary for them, and you can understand this reaction from their mimics and from their voices. Thank you, Ogül.
Thank you.
Then I'm continuing. So, for those who already have more than 9 years old as a child or nephew, or for those who already work with the children, knows that in some level, children doesn't care about fairy tales because it's not, it's a child thing. After 9 years old, of course, there are a lot of interesting children who likes fairy tales as well, but it's highly recommended to tell the stories of the mythologies. And the reason behind that is also a cognitive development, especially focusing on the analytical thinking. In the myths, just like the North myth, there are very interesting, fantastic world. Like the characters, the way how they react each other is more interesting in terms of analyzing, in terms of order, in terms of reflecting. In the fairy tales, there are some typical characters like good or bad, jealous or not jealous, ugly or beautiful. But in the myth world, it's more complex characters. Therefore, the anticipation and the level of problem solving is really interesting, and the level of enjoyment due to age of your child is also more interesting. And the nature of the wisdom in the mythologies is so beautiful. And one of the important things that I want to say is there are so many different myths in a different part of different cultures, and it developed an awareness of other cultures. In my teenage time, I was only know the Greek myth, for example, since I'm coming from Turkey, the Aegean side. I think I'm very lucky that I have this knowledge, that I grow up with Apollon and Artemis, for example, or Aphrodite and Zeus, Athena and Medusa. And until I came to 24, actually, I never heard that there are also Norse mythologies, for example, or Slavian mythologies. And you can see some similarities and differences as well in a different cultural human treasure as mythologies. In that sense, if you have a child who is in the teenage period, who doesn't understand what you are saying, who doesn't listen you very carefully, go ahead for the myths. You will see the difference. Any comments? Any question? I'm going to. Here is another favorite character of mine, Nasreddin Hoca. For those who already grow up in Turkish culture, knows how good Nasreddin Hoca is. For the Tales of the Fools, I am like to say that the trickster tales. There's a character, kind of Nasreddin Hoca, who is very wandering and wondering, who enjoys explore the rules of everyday experience. However, he has a real wisdom at the end of the day. And it's a very interesting logic and very interesting choice with sense of humor. In that sense, the end of those kind of tales of fools is over most of the time with the sake of common good. Therefore, you can tell those stories actually after the age of 7. I really like Tales of Fools because they are very colorful and help to think more about outside the box and develop the anticipation and problem solving. In that regard, I actually want to ask you to other cultural backgrounds apart from Turkish culture. Do you have a Nasreddin Hoca in your culture?
I'm thinking, I don't know, would Max and Moritz be one of them?
The two guy with the yellow book.
I don't know what color it is. It's two boys, and they always do, how do you say, like they're really cheeky, you know, they do a lot of things they're not supposed to do.
Nice.
And then they usually get caught, right? I'm not sure, Sarah. What do you think?
I think so. I also thought of Pumuckl, but I'm also not sure. I don't know so much about trickster tales, but it's interesting. I will read about it.
Yeah, or even what's his name? The Michel aus Lüneburg.
Lönneberg, yeah.
Michel, I don't know what it's called.
Mm.
But it's like boys that always, you know, they always play tricks on other people, and they.
Is the clowning character?
Yeah. But also like they do things, and sometimes they're not aware that it's something bad, and then they get caught and they get punished or not. Or sometimes they do it on purpose just to annoy other people. It's this kind of thing. Yeah.
Alvaro, you were saying something. I cannot hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Alvaro, now you come back. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. From my city, La Paz, which is surrounded by mountains, so the stories are quite pretty much related also to mountains. For example, the origin of one mountain, which is a volcano, it was because it was fighting against another mountain, and this other mountain cut the head of this mountain. That's how it became a beheaded mountain, which is actually a volcano. So it is a lot related to mountains, also to the spirits of the mountains.
Yes.
To the spirits of the mountains that receive also offerings and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. In that moment, I also want to talk about the sacred texts, some religious texts or some wisdom tales. I also recommend you to tell those kind of stories after the age of 7, focusing on this symbolic thinking. Of course, if it is relatively short and easy to follow the sequences, then you can tell those stories after the 4 years old as well. However, pedagogically, they say that after the age 7, they can also understand those kind of wisdom tales more interestingly. Since I am following the slides, unfortunately, I cannot see what you were writing in the chat. Sarah, can you please help me if there is an interesting information?
Yeah, we were just also sharing the references for the trickster tales from different countries, or any stories you would like to share. And tomorrow I could then put it in the email that I sent to you with the PowerPoint, so that you all have these titles. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sarah. And thank you for all this beautiful sharing. I will check for sure. So now we came another big topic. Libraries. Libraries are about freedom. Freedom to read, freedom of ideas, freedom of communication. They are about education, about entertainment, about making safe spaces, and about access to information. When we compare our period of time as a zeitgeist, comparing to our mother and father generation, we receive 5 times more information. In that sense, when you use the internet to find the right story, you can have some confusion. You can have some paradox of choices of what I'm going to tell it now. Yeah, and I don't know. It seems boring. I don't like it. Oh, it's the same. So you can really feel lost in searching online if you don't know actually what to tell. Thanks God, especially in Berlin, we do have a wonderful libraries to find out. And in these libraries, you can simply take an advanced help for children books, and especially the fairy tales as a book. They are just so beautiful. The illustration, the texture, the layers is really interesting to explore. Therefore, I really want to add libraries while we're thinking about how to pick the right stories. In that sense, libraries are the black box, and there's incredibly beautiful stories that you can find rather than finding only an online platform. Sarah, maybe you can add some interesting information about libraries since you know more than I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually quite surprised when I came back to Berlin, because I grew up in Berlin and I was going to libraries when I was a child with my parents very often. But then I somehow forgot that they exist. And I think, well, I mean, I went to libraries for my studies, but it was so related to studying and to work that I forgot that there is this richness of books that you can just borrow for your own pleasure. And now with this project, with the Encounters Media Workshop, we actually married a library. So this project is the marriage between a network and a library. And I think all of us discovered our marriage partner as a very interesting site to discover, especially when it comes to children, because we are based, I mean, our project is based in Tempelhof Schöneberg, but there is libraries all over Berlin. And with like, you pay 10 euro for a year for this library card, and then you can go to whichever library and borrow the books, borrow music, borrow films, and also use online tools. And I think that is quite helpful. I mean, if you think of, you know, buying books all the time, that's also not the solution, especially not, I have friends with a lot of children who read very fast now. They're just digesting book after book after book, and therefore it's really interesting to think about libraries. And I'm sure in other cities, in Graz, and you also have a good network of libraries.
I mean, you go to library, you just check very interesting books, you think about it, you feel it, you love it, and when you have this feeling that, yes, I connect with this story, you really can find very beautiful fairy tales, mythologies, and interesting stories from a different cultural background. So I also wanted to share with you some practical sources that you can check it out when you want to tell a story for your children. Also for those who already telling stories as a performer, I want to share some English sources. One of the famous storytellers, Heidi Dalsven from Norway, had an incredibly beautiful website, and in this website you can find a lot of different storyteller performances. There are beautiful videos. The other websites are really open to explore, to find out the interesting subtitles, the interesting texts. And in that sense, Crick Crack Club is very important for English speakers, storytellers world. It's extremely inspiring. I'm not exaggerating, really. And in the brain pickings, you can find a lot of different book sources, and especially for those who are interested in illustrations in the books, it's a treasure. That's what I'm going to say. And for the German online sources, I want to thank my friend Hanna from Doable Storytellers, who is here right now. There are very interesting sources connected to Grimm's brothers, but at the same time Andersen Mädchen, and also different stories from the different part of the world. And there is a very interesting information in Fachstelle Kinderwelten für Vorurteilbewusste Bildung und Erziehung. Those kind of details are absolutely important. And last but not least, since I'm from Turkey and since a lot of participants are from Turkey, I especially want to give some suggested sources for Turkish storytellers. For all storytellers who tell the stories in Turkish should get Anadolu Masalları from Hasan Latif Sarıyüce and Anadolu Masalları from Eflatun Cem Güney. The texture of the riddles at the beginning is just so beautiful that you can play with your children. And I really like Seçme Dünya Masalları as a different backgrounds. I really like their languages. It's beautiful. I'm not kidding. And as a books, I highly recommend the Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. However, the translation version of Turkish of this book is not very good. Therefore, there is a beautiful interview with Bill Moyers with Joseph Campbell called Mytolojinin Gücü in Turkish. And for online sources, please check our storytelling website, Seba Center. You can find a very interesting performances online right now, especially in quarantine times. I mean, post-quarantine times, let's say. I'm also a bit confused. There are very interesting book recommendations to check as well, to tell your children, but also to develop yourself individually. One of the storytellers in Turkey who created the Renaissance of Art of Storytelling, Judith Lieberman, is doing a beautiful podcast, Masal Buya. And my storytelling teacher, Senem Donatan Mohan, just created a beautiful Turkish storytelling online YouTube channel. There are myths and animal stories. Enjoy them. And lastly, Müzik Masal Cini is actually giving a very interesting source in Turkish that you can follow in the internet if you are not able to go to library. I'm talking too much in this session, I know. Therefore, now it's your time. What is your connection to the story at the end of the day?
I guess we need to like it. I mean, in order to tell a story, I always feel like I must really enjoy it myself. Otherwise, I can't tell it to other person.
Enjoyment for totally. I feel you, Ogül. And as a path of inner development, I also want to ask, what is your connection to the story? You know, there's a body, there's a mind, there's a spirit. It's a complex mechanism.
It's maybe that characters are inspiring, or they're like talking to a part of me. I mean, I'm not the character, but I see myself in a character, or I see other people in the characters.
The narratives and character just hook you because you can personalize it.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no recept of it. It's a kind of chemistry, actually. And Sarah, thank you for sharing this. If you can really have this feeling, then even though you don't tell the story perfectly fine technically, I'm sure that your children will tell the story interactively, and then you can give all this interesting particular technical knowledge that I told you at the beginning of the slides so easily. So therefore, in terms of picking the right story is hidden in you, your connection with the story. Any other idea? Sometimes I'm a bit tired to tell fairy tales because they are so long. Sometimes I need to tell it shortly, you know. And in that moment, I focus on animal stories because they are still very interesting to explore and more practical in terms of using my time. Therefore, apart from spiritual connection, sometimes practical connection can be also important. Ogül, go ahead. Something comes to your mouth, huh? I saw it.
I wasn't sure to ask it, whether to ask it or not, but for instance, when the person, the listener is not responding to the story, but
Yes.
it's what should we do? I mean, this is maybe not the question for this session.
No, but it's a very good question. Thank you.
Because I have a connection to the story, but I can't make the other person like it, or
Yes.
yeah, what's the problem then? What should I do?
Wallah, first of all, we hope that people enjoy listening our stories. This should be the beginning point. As I told at the beginning of this triangle, we just cannot know the connection between listener and the story. But this is the mystical part where it begins. Sometimes they just don't respond because inside of the story there are very deep themes going on, like death, sorrow, and in that moment maybe it's not only entertainment or enjoyment, but more mystical, more dark moments can be the another reality that we created through the fictional world. Therefore, for those moments, you feel it, Ogül, like you feel that maybe it's the right time to take the action as an interaction, or you just use the silence. And silence is also part of this interaction. Since we focus on with children how to tell our stories, while you tell the story, they actually want to hear it even more. They are really curious about the story, and therefore this inner development, the connection that you have with the story is extremely important, because during this telling session they can ask you a question, very silly, that you never think about it, and if you don't have any connection, then it doesn't really make sense. But if you really have a meaningful connection with the story as this chemistry connection, let's say, then you can really give something more intense. One of the things that I would like to tell also before completing, sometimes some stories can catch you, but also scares you. Those are the great stories, for sure. For find out what you are missing in your emotional world to connect. Before finishing my tutorial, I want to share one of the inspiring storytellers and human rights activists, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm really hoping that I pronounce it well. There's a very interesting TED talk that I will want to share with you, and she's talking about the danger of a single story. If you grow up as a child only from one perspective, let's say in the power mechanism, only the Western literature, then your knowledge about the other cultures is very superficial and incomplete and not even true. In that sense, I want to share what she says, and maybe one of those participants can read it. Cemre, do you want to read it?
Yeah, I can read it. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity.
Thank you so much, Cemre.
Thank you.
It's a very interesting coincidence what's happening nowadays in USA. Like, we all know the tension. And if we only tell one single story, then these children can focus on the differences rather than our similarities as a human mind, as a human being. In that sense, I really want to take the attention of what she is saying about how dangerous to tell one single story as well, because then our emotional world through stories can be very broken about other cultures, about other cultural people's stories. However, if we can actually use the power of the stories in another way, then maybe we can really create something, a different world for our next generation, hopefully. So here is the link for this inspiring talk. And I share again my primary useful sources while preparing the slides. And believe me or not, this is the end. Is there anyone in this room who enjoyed the workshop?
Yes.
Of course.
Wow, I'm so happy. And
I am very sad now that it will end.
Yeah, me too.
yeah, me too, Gül, me too. And I want to close the session. If you don't have any question, Sarah will share with us a very
Well,
beautiful thing.
do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Fatma.
Okay, I have a question to you.
Yes.
I heard that there are some zehirli, poisonous fairy tales. To tell
There are some what?
Zehirli İngilizcesini tam şey yapamadım da.
Toxic fairy tales. Let's
Toxic.
say.
Okay,
Yes.
toxic.
Yes.
Yeah, like frog, a prince.
Yes.
So how we can know how are affecting our kids? This one, for example, that book I bought new, Annemin Masalları.
Yes.
Okay, inside there is one.
The answer. This is. Thank you so much for opening this.
Fairy tales is saying that she was going to the town on Wednesday, and she
Fatma, sometimes I cannot hear you. Sometimes I'm losing what you are saying.
maybe now better because
Yes,
Bluetooth.
yes, I'm listening you more. Yes.
Okay. sorry. So on this one, it says there is a fairy tale. It says in a town,
Yes.
an old lady living, and she's coming to the town on Wednesday. She's wearing a shalwar and taking the kids who is not listening their mom, and she's taking them away. The kids are not coming to home.
Yes.
And then another old lady who has got the courage. So she said with the drum, o drum, davul. She said the kids who has this Wednesday shalwar lady got, they are all dying on a fire, and then that lady, that shalwar lady, ran through the mountain, and then she disappeared. I was just reading it directly.
Yes, yes.
This is so scary.
Yes, Fatma, thank you for sharing this. It's a very big topic actually. How toxic fairy tales can be, or how can we also focus on the right stories for my children. I can say that first of all, as a storyteller, if you don't have any connection or any awkward feeling about the elements of the story, like I don't know, some in terms of reading those characters literally in gender way or in the racial way, if it doesn't give you a good feeling, I will suggest you not to tell this story. At the same time, I want to remind us that those stories are surviving like 1,000 years. Like we are thinking about those texts in our modern mind. In that sense, let's take very simple example from the wolf and the Red Riding Hood. If this wolf exists until today, this wolf survive until today, and there is a message and wisdom in this tips, in this character. In that sense, if we interpret those stories in a more feminine perspective, which are very important reading, by the way, then the level of the deepness and the meaning of the story can be quite meaningless. And if you have this feeling, you should definitely not tell those stories. However, those characters or those sequences are creating a world of archetype and symbols. Those are abstract thinking. And in that sense, it touches some sort of themes to your audience, to your child. In that sense, there is no one answer for those kind of question. How can I understand the fairy tale or the story can be toxic? It's really up to you, up to your values. However, the idea is actually also to know how I'm telling these stories. Especially for those cruel moments, if you feel something strange, probably it's quite connected to your inner world, and maybe you should do something for it. However, it can be really annoying and you just didn't like it, then you should focus on another text to tell your child. I repeat and repeat again, there are so many materials about fairy tales, especially in the internet, and they are really badly written. Therefore, I highly recommend you to buy the good sources, especially using libraries are the main reason of that. Fatma, does it make sense to you?
Yes, a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. You are welcome.
Can I also just comment something quickly if we don't end the session?
I hope you have a time, Sarah, right? Okay, go ahead.
Just quickly, because what you said is so true, Pinar. One of your recommendation was Judith Lieberman's podcasts,
Yeah.
and I once listened to one of her podcasts, and she was talking about exactly this topic that she exactly said what you said. She said that also we shouldn't be scared of showing children the scary things, because these are the reality.
Yes.
They will in the future how you say, encounter with these problems, with that, with like scary, whatever scary things are. These are part of the life, and so we should, by telling these stories, in a way, we are preparing them for the future, she said.
Exactly. I mean, if we cannot just cut off all the symbols of the skeleton story world, because then it doesn't make sense. We really need to give this chaos or the tension between the characters. However, of course, it's really up to you how you tell the story. It doesn't make sense if you also create the storytelling world really cruel, and then it creates unnecessary sense of scary feeling. I'm not talking about healthy scary feeling, like unnecessary scary feelings, then it doesn't make sense. It's really about finding the balance. Thank you, August, so much. So now I'm closing this beautiful online tutorial. Thank you, all of you. I was so happy to share this beautiful tutorial with you.